Hey guys, tonight we travel back, way back, into the golden glow of candlelight and parchment scrolls, where weddings weren't sealed with a kiss, but with an ink brush and a whole lot of very specific item lists. You find yourself in ancient China, in a scholar's dusty study, watching as the hush of evening settles over lacquered furniture, and the air carries the scent of ink, wax, and faint sandalwood. A single flickering lantern casts long shadows as a man in layered robes carefully writes out the terms of a marriage contract. There's no romantic music here, just the slow scratch of brush on paper. Behind him, the families of the bride and groom whisper tensely, occasionally chiming in with reminders like, "Don't forget the goose down pillows," or "Make sure to note the 2 bolts of jade green silk." This isn't just a list of stuff. It's a binding legal document, half love story, half ledger, and you're beginning to realize with growing awe and a dash of sleepy skepticism that if you were to get married here, your entire relationship might hinge on whether someone properly inventoried your future soup ladle collection. You probably won't survive this level of bureaucratic romance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere warm or chilly, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always lovely seeing how far these late-night journeys reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The marriage contract begins with names, of course, but not just the bride and groom. It includes their parents, grandparents, and sometimes even the town scribe's cat, judging by how long these scrolls are. You lean in, trying to decipher the elegant characters. The groom's family is gifting 5 strings of coins and a pair of embroidered slippers. The bride's side? They're offering up a dowry that includes a red lacquer chest, a set of silver hairpins, and a full tea service. The teapot has dragons on it. Of course it does. It's quiet, save for the steady brush strokes and the muffled clink of weights pressing down curling paper edges. Outside, cicadas hum, oblivious to the monumental negotiations unfolding inside. In ancient China, marriage wasn't simply a personal milestone. It was a legal alliance, a social strategy, and a financial transaction wrapped up in ceremony. And the contract? It was the glue holding it all together. Most were written on mulberry paper with ink made from soot and water, impermanent tools for what was supposed to be a permanent union. You wonder if anyone else sees the irony. Maybe that's why the scribe has a tired look in his eyes. Historians still argue whether these contracts were more about love or logistics. You overhear someone mutter, probably one of the uncles. There's a skeptical tone to his voice, like he's seen a few too many forever loves unravel when the dowry ran thin or the goose stopped laying. A mainstream fact most forget? These contracts weren't just formalities. They had legal weight. In fact, if a dispute ever arose, say, the groom turned out to be allergic to marriage or someone miscounted the silk bolts, officials could refer to the contract as hard evidence. It wasn't quite Judge Judy, but close enough. You scan the room again. On the table lies a jade stamp, used to seal the deal literally. The symbol it leaves behind isn't just decorative. It represents the family's honor. And a marriage contract without a proper seal is as good as a crumpled shopping list. One misstamped scroll and boom, your social standing could drop faster than a noodle in soy sauce. Now here's where things get quirky. One contract you peek at includes, no joke, a clause about a chicken. Not a metaphorical chicken. A literal one, white-feathered, hand-fed, and apparently trained to perch on the bride's shoulder during festivals. The contract states it must be part of the dowry and in good health with both eyes open. You blink. Same contract. Same. You move slowly around the room, trailing your fingers along the worn wood of the furniture, wondering how many generations passed through here. It's easy to forget how serious this all is until you see the faces. Young brides-to-be with stiff smiles, older women biting their lips, knowing what's ahead, and fathers frowning at the mention of extra bedding costs. This isn't just ceremony. It's survival. And yet there's beauty. You watch a young girl, probably the bride's younger sister, holding up a piece of her sibling's dowry silk. She lets it catch the lantern light, giggling softly. For a brief moment, the heavy weight of tradition lifts. But then, someone barks a reminder about the goat that still needs to be documented, and the child scurries off. It's hard not to feel a mix of admiration and existential dread. You try to imagine writing a modern version of this marriage contract, something like, Bride offers half her streaming subscriptions, a French press, and her childhood copy of The Lion King on VHS. Not quite the same gravitas, but maybe similar vibes. Still, you can't deny the cultural richness on display. These contracts paint a vivid picture, not just of what people owned, but of what they valued. A teacup wasn't just ceramic. It was stability. A servant girl listed on the dowry wasn't just a name. It was a statement of family wealth, status, and often, a safety net. Even today, remnants of these old practices still linger in modern wedding customs, especially in rural areas. Some families keep replicas of ancient contracts as part of the decor. You've probably walked past one without realizing you were staring at a 2,000-year-old prenup dressed up as wall art. You begin to grow drowsy with the rhythm of the ink strokes and murmured voices. Outside, the wind rustles through bamboo stalks. A dog barks once in the distance. Inside, the contract is nearly finished. The scribe sighs, wipes his brow, and applies the final seal with a soft, satisfying thunk. You lean back, eyes heavy, already knowing that the scroll he's just completed will outlive most of the people in this room. Strange, isn't it? How ink and paper can preserve promises better than hearts sometimes can. The scroll seal is barely dry, and already someone is rolling it up with the kind of reverence you'd expect for a sacred relic. Or maybe a really nice dumpling recipe. You watch as the contract is tucked into a carved wooden case, bound with a crimson ribbon. But you're not done here. Your attention drifts to the table beside the scribe, where a second document lies half-finished. This one is longer, more detailed, and honestly way more interesting. It's the dowry list. Think of it as love's itemized receipt. And it's long. Your eyes glide over the characters as if scrolling through an ancient shopping app. 5 embroidered silk robes. A bronze mirror with phoenix etching. 1 sedan chair foldable. 2 servant girls with specified hair braiding skills. A jade comb set. And then, just to keep things spicy, a small, intricately carved incense burner shaped like a turtle. Practical? Maybe. Symbolic? Definitely. The turtle represents longevity after all. Because nothing says eternal love like a tiny amphibian puffing sandalwood smoke out of its nose. You blink and take a breath, trying to keep up. These dowry lists weren't just about stuff, they were about status. You're looking at a carefully curated resume, meant to prove a bride's value, her family's wealth, and her readiness to manage a household. In many cases, the dowry was a young woman's only real form of economic agency. And yes, some included livestock. Try slipping that into your registry at Crate and Barrel. Mainstream historical fact? In ancient China, especially during the Tang and Song dynasties, the dowry was often as substantial as the groom's bride price, or even more so. That's right. Brides weren't just handed off with a tearful goodbye and a bag of rice. Their families put serious coin or silks or oxen into the deal. It was like a high-stakes trade. Bride for wealth. Status for status. Silks for future grandbabies. You lean forward, noticing a line of characters next to a lacquered chest. It specifies not only the number of drawers but also that the bottom one is lined in rabbit fur. You almost chuckle. Historians still argue whether these specific item descriptions were meant to impress the groom's family, or simply keep nosy relatives from arguing later. Honestly, maybe both. And speaking of relatives, oh, they have opinions. You sit nearby as an older aunt squints at the list and mutters something about how her dowry had 3 gold bangles, not 2. Another aunt huffs in reply, and suddenly you're in the middle of a passive-aggressive competition. Centuries old, still fueled by tea and comparison. You try not to giggle as one of them mentions that her sister once received a live goose as part of her dowry, and it laid golden-colored eggs. That part is definitely embellished. You hope. But don't mistake this for petty squabbling. Dowries were serious business. They weren't just given to the groom, they were typically retained by the bride. Legally, they belonged to her. That silk bedding and gold bracelet stash? That was her insurance policy. In the event of divorce, widowhood, or sudden oops, he's gone off to war. Her dowry was often her only means of support. Of course, that didn't always work out in practice. Power dynamics being what they were, some husbands tried to take control of their wives' dowries, especially if they were substantial. But the law on paper at least said otherwise. And for some women, that legal foothold made all the difference. You shuffle over to another contract and take a look. This one's from a smaller village. The list is shorter: 2 bolts of cloth, a spinning wheel, and a pair of sturdy shoes. Not glamorous but practical. You can almost picture the bride walking into her new life, feet snug in those shoes, fabric ready to be sewn into the first curtain she ever owns. Quirky tidbit: there's a case recorded where a bride's dowry included an actual wooden puppet theater. Apparently, her family believed she was so skilled at storytelling and shadow play that her talents deserved a permanent stage. Marriage and marionettes, what a combo! You sit back and sigh. It's oddly comforting, this obsessive attention to detail. Like everyone's trying to build stability out of objects. Make something real and lasting from tea sets and textile rolls. Feels relatable in a strange way. You've probably fretted about which brand of pillow to buy before. These people just had to list it on legal documents. And not every item was material. Some dowry lists included skills. A note might mention that the bride could recite the classic of filial piety, or that she embroidered plum blossoms so finely they looked like real dew was clinging to the silk. No pressure or anything. One scholar's translation notes a particularly poetic entry. She can brew tea to match the season and sings well in the second tone. You're not entirely sure what that means, but it sounds both charming and terrifyingly specific. As the night deepens, the study quiets. The scribe is nodding off and the lantern burns low. You picture the scrolls being tucked away into long drawers, and hope they won't be nibbled by moths. After all, this isn't just a list of items. It's a woman's future security, her parents' final act of support, and a quiet, hopeful prayer for prosperity. You begin to doze, imagining a line of brides stepping into sedan chairs, chests of dowry treasures behind them, disappearing into misty village roads. You hear the soft creak of cartwheels and the whisper of silk. And just before you drift off entirely, someone walks by holding a chicken. Not the one-eyed kind, thankfully. The morning mist still clings to the rooftops when you awaken. Or maybe you never quite fell asleep. You're in the courtyard now, where the air smells like warm congee and burnt incense, and the local matchmaker has already arrived in a whirlwind of layered silks and barely contained opinions. She moves like she owns the place, which, to be fair, she sort of does, socially speaking. In this part of ancient China, the matchmaker isn't just a meddling relative. She's an institution. She waves a fan dramatically, barking instructions to a frazzled mother. The groom's star sign clashes with fire. Choose an auspicious date in water month, or don't blame me when the rice molds before harvest. You try not to laugh, but honestly it feels like you're watching a cosmic wedding planner who doubles as a neighborhood gossip columnist. This isn't superstition, it's science in a manner of speaking. Lunar calendars, astrological compatibility charts, and ancestral tomb blessings are all part of the matchmaking mix. Historians still argue whether these astrological calculations were genuinely believed, or just clever ways to stall until the right price was offered. Either way, the matchmaker's got a scroll filled with birth times and animal signs, and she's wielding it like a tax auditor with a vendetta. She pulls you into her orbit without asking. You look like you'd make a decent ox, strong, steady, a little dull. Perfect husband material. Shame about the eyebrows, though. You nod politely. Your eyebrows have never felt so judged. Beside her, 2 families haggle, not about love or affection, but about logistics. It's oddly charming. The bride's uncle insists she deserves at least 3 maids, not 2. The groom's aunt counters with, she can hire a goose if she needs extra help. The matchmaker breaks it up with a sharp slap of her fan. This is ancient courtship in full swing, and it's all about aligning stars, family names, and yes, balance sheets. The idea of romantic love being the central pillar of marriage? Let's just say that's a fairly recent development. Back here, it's more about duty, harmony, and continuing the family line with as little drama as possible. And in a time when resources were tightly controlled and social mobility was rare, marriage arrangements were strategic chess games. Mainstream historical fact. Matchmakers had real power. They didn't just introduce people. They negotiated bride prices, facilitated contract wording, and ensured that all necessary rituals, like presenting betrothal gifts or avoiding taboo dates, were followed to the letter. A bad matchmaker could bring dishonor. A good one, she could elevate an entire clan. Now let's talk about gossip because it's everywhere. While you sip imaginary tea in the background, the matchmaker slips between business and idle chatter. The Chun girl's dowry list had 6 silver spoons. Must have robbed a eunuch. she whispers. Then in the same breath, she's back to calculating which phase of the moon best aligns with goat year grooms. It's absurd and delightful. Like if a wedding officiant and a neighborhood busybody merged into one formidable force of silk and sarcasm. Fringe tidbit for tonight? Some matchmakers were known to carry small talismans, tiny carved turtles, peachwood charms, or slips of red paper, to protect the future couple from misaligned energies. One infamous matchmaker even carried a bag of emotional harmonizers, which basically consisted of dried persimmons and two beetles tied together with thread. Romantic? Not particularly. Memorable? Absolutely. You trail the matchmaker as she heads toward the ancestral altar for the checking of compatibility. 2 name scrolls are presented, and a bit of rice wine is poured onto the ground. If the smoke rises straight up, the match is blessed. If it curls sideways, well, time to negotiate a dowry adjustment. Because clearly, that's the rice wine's business now. There's something soothing about the ceremony of it all. Every detail, every interaction has its place. You begin to see how much anxiety modern dating could avoid if we had astrological referees and contract clauses before the first date. Imagine. Must love dogs be born in a metal year, and offer 3 ducks and a seasonal incense set. Of course, not everyone loved this system. Even back then, some young people tried to subvert the process. Secret letters tucked into library books, messages passed via market vendors. There's even a recorded tale of a young woman who replaced her family's chosen match's name on the marriage contract with that of the scholar she truly loved. It caused a scandal, a trial, and, depending on which version you read, either a happy ending or 2 years of community service. But those are exceptions. For most, matchmaking followed a predictable rhythm. The bride price was agreed upon, the dowry was finalized, and the matchmaker got her fee, often a combination of cash, cloth, and dried fish. Imagine being paid in cod for successfully uniting 2 people who've never made eye contact. By afternoon, everything's nearly settled. The families bow politely to one another, and the matchmaker rolls up her scrolls with a pleased grunt. A servant brings her a cup of chrysanthemum tea, which she downs in one gulp. She's earned it. You stand under a persimmon tree as the sun begins to dip, painting the courtyard gold. A breeze kicks up, rustling the papers on the matchmaking table. One flutters toward you and you catch it. It's another dowry inventory. Of course it is. Always another list, another arrangement, another pair of lives being bound together by pen, parchment, and plenty of silver hairpins. You watch as the matchmaker disappears down the path, muttering to herself and swatting flies with her fan. She'll do it all again tomorrow. New stars, new scrolls, new brides. And as you settle in, letting the sounds of rustling trees and distant laughter wash over you, you feel a little grateful. Not just for your freedom to love, but for the peculiar, poetic efficiency of a world where marriages began with moon charts and ended with a receipt. The ink has dried, the families have agreed, and the matchmaker has gone home, probably to count her bundles of dried fish. You might think things would quiet down now, but no. You're handed another scroll, and this one? It's not the flashy dowry list or the celestial compatibility chart. This one is meatier, drier, legaler. You're looking at the full marriage contract, and let's just say it's weirdly specific. As you unroll it, the first lines feel familiar: names, birth dates, family lineages going back at least 3 ancestors, because clearly everyone's keeping receipts. But soon it gets more personal. Line by line, clause by clause, it starts to read like a legal playbook for domestic life. You're not sure whether to be impressed or mildly alarmed. Right there in black ink, the husband shall provide 2 dough of millet per lunar cycle, except during festival months, when an additional dough of sweet rice shall be provided. There's no I do here. Just he must supply rice or else. Honestly, you've read less demanding app user agreements. But here's the thing, these clauses served a purpose. In a world where legal rights were often stacked heavily against women, having even the smallest domestic guarantee in writing could make a world of difference. A dowry might get her in the door, but the contract was what gave her footing once she was there. Mainstream historical fact: by the Tang dynasty, it became increasingly common for marriage contracts to specify the financial and labor expectations of both parties. In some cases, it even outlined the inheritance of children, especially sons, where they'd live, who would raise them if something happened, and how property would be divided. You pause at a clause that feels deeply specific. Should the bride find herself unhappy in the mother-in-law's quarters, she may request a move to the outer chamber after the third season, contingent upon good behavior. You blink. Even ancient in-laws were a vibe. Some contracts even allowed for conditional dowry returns, clauses that stated if a divorce occurred under specific circumstances, certain dowry items had to be returned to the bride's family. Imagine trying to get your jade earrings back through a legal loophole involving an unwatered plum tree and 4 unwashed dishes. Historians still argue whether these fine print clauses were taken seriously in court or were more symbolic, kind of like when modern contracts say you can't bring poultry into a swimming pool. But enough examples survive to suggest that at least some were enforceable, especially in higher status families with legal clout. And yes, it gets even quirkier. You scroll further and discover a clause that reads, "The bride shall maintain the household altar with fresh offerings of fruit on even-numbered days, and shall refrain from singing loudly during ancestral rites unless explicitly invited." Not a joke. Someone actually wrote that into a binding legal document. Somewhere out there was a bride with a powerful set of lungs and a father-in-law who'd had enough. Then comes the section labeled Dispute Resolutions. This is where things feel extra real. It outlines exactly how grievances are to be brought forward, who mediates, usually a respected village elder, and what form of restitution is expected if either party fails in their duties. One contract even designates a bamboo mat as the neutral discussion space. You imagine 2 people sitting on that mat, arguing about duck eggs while trying not to wrinkle their robes. These clauses, odd as they are, paint a vivid picture of daily life. They speak of chores, routines, and rituals. And underneath it all, they reveal something deeply human. The desire for clarity, for structure, for some way to predict and shape the shared chaos of living with another person. You peek into another home as a family reads through a draft contract, debating whether the bride should be required to visit her birth family monthly or quarterly. It's a surprisingly touchy subject. More visits meant more comfort for the bride, but also implied that she might still be emotionally tethered to her old home. A concern for in-laws who expected full assimilation, like changing your phone plan but for emotional loyalty. One father insists on a clause that says the groom must never raise his voice during winter months. Why winter? No one knows. Maybe he gets seasonal rage. Maybe that's when her ears are most sensitive. Either way, it's going in. And let's not forget the clauses about gifts. Some contracts specify that the groom's family must present the bride with a first moon gift after the wedding. Something symbolic like a red cloak or a carved comb. Forgetting it? That's a legal offense, according to Aunt Zhao, who swears her cousin divorced over a missing red cloak. You file that away under petty but understandable. Fringe tidbit time. There's one contract from a rural Qing-era village that includes an emergency clause, stating that if the groom is conscripted into military service, the bride has full permission to take over the family's duck business, including the rights to all quacking stock. You snort quietly. Love is temporary. Duck management is forever. And all this comes before the actual wedding ceremony. You begin to understand why some of these marriages lasted a lifetime, not because of affection, but because it was too exhausting to go back and revise the paperwork. As you listen to the murmurs of families finalizing one last clause, something about dumpling distribution during Lunar New Year, you feel the comforting rhythm of tradition, predictability, a sense that every item, every rule, every slightly absurd demand was an attempt to make the unknown just a little more bearable. Outside, the lanterns are being lit again. A breeze carries the scent of ginger and soy. You hear laughter, dishes clinking, maybe even a low hum of a lullaby. Somewhere, someone is still deciding whether to include the phrase, "must tolerate snoring," in the footnotes of a marriage contract. And you? You stretch out your legs, rest your head against a wooden pillar, and start to drift, imagining the steady sound of brushstrokes, the scratch of ink, and the strangely soothing thought that somewhere 1,000 years ago, someone worried about dumpling clauses just like you would. You're barely awake when the scent of congee drifts back in, this time from a small kitchen across the courtyard. Morning in the new household has begun. The wedding is still a few days off, but the bride's dowry items are already arriving in slow ceremonial waves. Crates of porcelain, folded quilts, one surprisingly judgmental goose. And as you rub the sleep from your eyes, you realize today is about power. Not the flashy, throne-sitting kind. This is porridge pot power. Subtle, slow-simmered, and occasionally weaponized with a ladle. The dowry isn't just decoration. It's leverage. You wander through the main room, where the groom's mother is casually inspecting the red lacquer chest. She opens one drawer, runs her fingers across a velvet-lined jewelry box, and hums in a way that says, acceptable. Not impressed. Not disappointed. Just mentally scoring everything like it's a mildly competitive baking show. 2 sets of earrings, silver, not gold. No coral hairpins. She mutters. It's passive aggression in silk slippers. Mainstream historical fact. Dowries in ancient China weren't merely gifts. They were considered a reflection of the bride's family wealth and a form of startup capital for the new household. They helped ensure the bride wouldn't be entirely dependent on her husband or in-laws, and that mattered a lot. But here's where things get messy. The groom's family doesn't technically own the dowry. It legally belongs to the bride, as we've seen. But possession? That's another story. Once it's inside the house, subtle power dynamics kick in. If the groom's mother decides to borrow a silk robe or reassign a servant girl to another daughter-in-law, who's going to stop her? So the bride? She learns fast. You catch a glimpse of her behind a screen, watching everything with quiet calculation. She's got that look of someone who knows her betting count down to the thread, and has already mentally labeled each drawer with defensive spells. You get the sense that if anyone moves her incense burner, she'll know. Historians still argue whether dowries empowered women in practice, or simply offered the illusion of autonomy. On paper, a woman with a substantial dowry could exercise more influence in the household, negotiate better treatment, even access divorce if the situation turned sour. But in reality, social customs and family hierarchies often overruled legal ideals. You peek into the kitchen where an argument is already brewing over porridge. Yes, porridge. Turns out, one of the dowry items is a particularly nice bronze cooking pot, and the bride brought it with the intention of cooking for her new husband. But his mother insists it's too fine for daily use, and should be kept for festivals. The bride insists otherwise. A pot standoff ensues. You watch from a distance as 2 generations of women stare each other down over barley. And you realize this is the front line of domestic diplomacy. Another bride in the next courtyard down has used her dowry to create a small private garden. It's modest, just a few flowering vines, a stone bench, and a teapot stand, but it's hers. The elder women whisper about it being indulgent. She just calls it peace. You can see how even something as simple as choosing when and where to drink tea can be a quiet act of rebellion. Quirky tidbit. There's one story of a bride who, after clashing with her in-laws, used her dowry money to purchase a well-trained parrot that exclusively repeated mildly insulting poems. Whenever her husband's mother entered the room, it chirped, "The fish rots from the head. Oh no, it's you again." Nobody could prove she taught it that. Technically. Meanwhile, you catch the groom having a slightly panicked conversation with a cousin. "She brought her own ledger," he whispers, "like a full accounting book. With tabs." His cousin whistles, half impressed, half fearful. "Married a tactician, did you?" Because here's the twist. The more substantial the dowry, the more say the bride tends to have in how things run. She might not have the loudest voice at the dinner table, but she can choose which linens get used, how festival offerings are presented, and in some cases even influence the budget for household repairs. Want the back courtyard repaved? Better check with the woman who owns all the spare tile. One contract from the Tang dynasty included a clause giving the bride authority over holiday meal planning, specifically the right to dictate dumpling fillings. You'd think that's minor. It's not. Dumpling debates can end friendships. You sit down beside a low table and quietly observe the small movements of influence. A servant girl bows more deeply to the bride than the groom's mother. A nephew asks her where the ancestral incense is stored. Someone asks to borrow her scissors and calls her mistress instead of wife. Subtle shifts in language. Tiny displays of allegiance. And through it all, she remains composed. Not loud. Not demanding. But fully aware that the lacquer chest in her chamber, the jewelry in her box, and even that disputed porridge pot are hers. Not borrowed. Not loaned. Owned. You hear someone say, "She's lucky her father included land deeds." Another replies, "She's lucky she knows how to use them." You glance again at the bride. She's sipping tea, but her eyes are scanning the courtyard like a general on campaign. Fringe detail for the night? In some cases, a bride's dowry could include not just physical objects but receipts, literally written proof of her claim to certain items or funds, kept separately in her personal lockbox. If things got tense, she could whip out that proof and say, "Actually, that goat is mine, thank you." As dusk rolls in again, you watch the household settle. The disputes ease into routine. The porridge is served, perhaps not in the fancy bronze pot, but at least everyone's eating. A small truce has formed, stitched together with jasmine tea and reluctant compliments. And in the bride's quarters, she's laying out her quilts. Not to show off, just to claim her space. Softly, steadily, one silk layer at a time. You close your eyes to the quiet creak of floorboards, the murmur of family voices, and the knowledge that somewhere, deep in a lacquered drawer, a copy of that dowry list waits, itemized, sealed, and silently powerful. You wake to the gentle clatter of hairpins and the whisper snap of fabric being folded, unfolded, and folded again. Behind the screen, the bride is preparing herself. Not for the wedding just yet, but for a different kind of performance. This morning she isn't a bride. She's a strategist, an investor, and a diplomat in a silk robe. The soft hiss of her comb through her hair is steady, calming. And as she adjusts the mirror just so, you realize this isn't vanity. It's ritual. A rehearsal of control. Because in a world where her voice might be the last one heard at the table, her dowry gives her something louder. Leverage. It's easy to think of a dowry as just material stuff, but tonight, you're about to see it used as a quiet but formidable toolkit of resistance. The red lacquer chest? That's not just furniture. That's an arsenal. You follow her through the household, where every polite smile masks a mental ledger update. She walks past the kitchen, where the servant girl she brought with her is already supervising meal prep. Not assisting. Supervising. The groom's family notices, but no one comments. Technically, she owns that servant. Technically, she calls the shots. Mainstream historical fact. In many regions of ancient China, the legal ownership of the dowry remained with the bride even after marriage. If a dispute arose, especially one involving abuse or neglect, she could, in theory, reclaim her dowry and leave, or have it returned to her family. In practice, of course, it wasn't always that simple. But in wealthier households, that clause had teeth. And she knows it. You watch her engage with her new mother-in-law. It's all smiles and compliments, but the subtext is dripping with calculation. "Oh, you serve pickled lotus root every morning? That's so rustic," she says sweetly, while placing her personal spice rack beside the stove. "There's chili oil in there. Imported." Quiet flex. Historians still argue whether brides consciously used their dowries to gain household control, or whether that influence just emerged naturally over time. But when you're standing next to a woman who has her own ledger book and a tea set nicer than the ancestral one in the main hall, it's hard to believe it's an accident. One of the neighbor women, more curious than polite, asks about the jewelry case. "Do you wear those bangles often?" she asks innocently. "Only when I want something," the bride replies without looking up. Boom. You follow her into the courtyard where she's planting a small potted chrysanthemum. It's one of the many soft skills her dowry includes. Her family made sure she arrived with not just items but talents. Gardening, calligraphy, embroidery, seasonal poetry recitation. They're more than hobbies. They're social armor. Because what do you do when your voice isn't welcome at the table? You let your plum blossoms speak for you. Quirky tidbit. There's a surviving anecdote about a bride who embroidered her grievances. Literally stitched them into a silk scroll. Every line was a complaint about household injustices, sewn in flawless red thread. The scroll was accidentally discovered by her husband's uncle, who was so impressed he funded her return home, out of respect and mild terror. You can't make this up. Back in the garden, the bride sets up a low table with 2 cups of tea. She's invited her husband's younger sister to sit. You raise an eyebrow. That's strategic. She's building internal alliances. And as they sip quietly under the flowering vines, you can practically hear the in-law dynamics shift a notch. That sister will now vouch for her, gently correct family gossip, maybe even defend her choice of seasonal dumpling fillings. It's a long game, and she's already winning. You remember the bronze mirror from the dowry chest. She placed it not in her room, but in the front hall. So everyone can reflect before they speak, she'd said with a small smile. A bold move? Yes. Passive-aggressive? Also yes. Effective? Clearly. The groom is watching too. He doesn't quite know what to make of his new wife. She's elegant, quiet, and somehow already knows where the spare firewood is kept. He asks cautiously whether she might help with planning the festival banquet. Only if I can use my cookware, she replies, which is dowry code for I'm running the show or I'm not showing up. Fringe fact of the night? Some dowries included calligraphy scrolls inscribed by famous poets, status symbols, but also quiet power pieces. In one recorded case, a bride displayed her dowry scroll with a quote that read, "Silence in the hall does not mean absence of the lion." Her in-laws reportedly stopped interrupting her after that. Later that night, you follow her into the main hall, where she kneels to tend the ancestral altar. It's a chore she volunteered for. Smart. Rituals are where influence can be quietly claimed. As she lights the incense, she subtly replaces the family's usual dull offering bowl with a brighter, more elaborate one from her dowry. No one protests. They just nod a little confused. It's a tiny win, but it counts. In ancient Chinese households, these tiny wins added up. Over time, a clever bride could shape the rhythm of an entire family. What they ate, how they celebrated, even when they slept. And she didn't do it by shouting. She did it with strategy, silk, and a whole lot of listed inventory. You settle beside her private screen now, watching her rearrange her hairpins. Everyone has a purpose. Everyone was listed. The sandalwood box they came in? Dowry item number 17. The mirror she checks her reflection in? Item number 22. The confidence in her eyes? Not listed, but definitely earned. Outside, the courtyard quiets. A dog barks once. Someone's sandals shuffle past. And you, wrapped in soft shadows, find yourself marveling at how something as ordinary as a comb or a cooking pot could become a quiet declaration of independence. And maybe, just maybe, you'll never look at a ladle the same way again. It's finally here. The day that's been predicted, prepared for, charted by lunar phases, whispered about in marketplaces, and negotiated over tea-stained contracts. It's wedding day. You wake to the smell of red candles, roasted sesame, and the faintest whiff of something burning that shouldn't be burning. You rub your eyes and squint out the window. The courtyard is a storm of red silk. Ribbons flutter, musicians tune stringed instruments that sound like sleepy cats, and distant relatives have already begun bickering about seating arrangements. You trudge into the chaos and instantly regret not bringing earplugs. The groom's house is the center of the storm. Banners have been strung up, paper cranes hang from ceiling beams, and someone, probably an overly enthusiastic uncle, has attempted to balance a basket of fruit on a decorative ancestral altar. It falls. You pretend not to notice. Everyone pretends not to notice. You peek into the bride's room. She's already being dressed, her face powdered pale, her lips a delicate red blossom. The room smells of camellia oil and quiet tension. Her hair is being styled into something that could double as architectural sculpture. Hairpins everywhere. You count at least a dozen, and that's just on the left side. She looks regal. She looks calm. She's absolutely not calm. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Chinese weddings, especially among wealthier families, were sprawling theatrical affairs. Red was the dominant color, symbolizing joy, luck, and fertility. The bride often wore layers of red silk embroidered with gold thread, phoenixes and peonies swirling along every hem. And no, there were no vows. No kiss. Just bows. Many coordinated bows. Now, over at the groom's quarters, a panic has set in. Someone forgot the ceremonial chicken. Another person can't find the second best sedan chair. The best one has been reserved for the bride, but it's squeaking ominously when tested. You step back before you're roped into polishing lanterns or adjusting more paper cranes. Meanwhile, the dowry items are being paraded through the street. Yes, paraded. This is a full-blown public display. Servants and family members march slowly, each carrying one item or leading an ox cart of household goods. It's not just transport, it's spectacle. And it's completely intentional. That fancy comb? That red lacquered chest? The backup bronze walk? All of it is being shown off. Look what our daughter brings, the procession says without speaking. She's not arriving empty-handed. She's bringing her worth. You pause as you watch a particularly serious young man carry a silk pillow. He's holding it like it contains state secrets. You nod respectfully. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, they decorate even the livestock that came as part of the dowry. Chickens with tiny red ribbons. Goats with bells. One account even describes a dowry pig with its ears painted gold. Historians still argue whether this was meant to impress, amuse, or simply distract the in-laws long enough for the bride to breathe. And speaking of breathing, the bride is now stepping into her sedan chair, helped by two older female relatives who whisper blessings and instructions the way modern bridesmaids whisper emergency deodorant tips. Smile but not too wide. Bow but not too deep. Don't trip on the step. Or do, if you want attention. She's veiled now, her face hidden by a layer of gauzy red fabric embroidered with phoenixes. The veil is thick enough to preserve mystery, but thin enough for her to peek through and judge the quality of the sedan chair paint job. Priorities. You join the back of the procession as it moves toward the groom's house. Firecrackers pop. Drums pound. Children shout. The bride is coming. Like she's the moon goddess herself. And in a way she is, stepping out of her old life and into a new one under ceremonial red silk and a whole lot of scrutiny. The sedan chair sways with each step, and you imagine what it feels like inside. The bride, alone in her thoughts, probably gripping a silk handkerchief, trying to remember every rule she was told. Who to bow to, how to bow, when not to speak, and what to do if someone says her veil is crooked. Answer nothing. Absolute silence is required until the right moment. And that moment arrives as she reaches the threshold. A red carpet of sorts, really just a carefully swept stretch of fabric, has been laid out. Two bowls of fire are placed on either side. She's helped out of the sedan chair and walks carefully between them. It's symbolic purification. Goodbye to the old self. Hello to the new one. But nothing about this is casual. Inside, the wedding hall is thick with incense and noise. The groom stands at the center, trying not to look terrified. Or sweaty. Spoiler, he's both. You stand quietly as the couple meets, still veiled, still silent, and begin the three bows ritual. One to heaven and earth, one to the ancestors, and one to each other. No vows. No declarations. Just deep, slow, coordinated bows that somehow say more than any poem ever could. And now the meal. You didn't think we'd skip the meal, did you? Tables groan under the weight of sticky rice cakes, steamed fish with the heads on always, lotus root stuffed with honey, and dumplings shaped like, you guessed it, gold ingots. There's always symbolism in the food. Wealth, fertility, long life. One unlucky cousin tries to take a bite before the bride's first toast and gets whacked with a bamboo fan. Rules are rules. Historians still debate whether some wedding foods were meant to impress or intimidate. A roast duck that resembles a phoenix? Cool. A 12-layered cake you're required to eat in silence while balancing a jade coin on your wrist? Less so. In the middle of all this, there's a sudden kerfuffle. Someone misplaced the ceremonial wine. Crisis. Mild panic. The bride calmly gestures to one of her dowry boxes. Inside, an emergency wedding wine set, complete with matching cups. That's dowry item number 42. And it just saved the banquet. The crowd murmurs in approval. The groom smiles awkwardly. The mother-in-law looks, for the first time, mildly impressed. You sit back, your belly full. Your senses overloaded with red and gold and ginger sesame everything. The bride is finally allowed to speak. Her voice is clear, measured, maybe even a little smug. She thanks the guests, pours the wine, and toasts to the future. Somewhere outside, a goat with gold-painted ears lets out a celebratory bleat. And the bride? She takes a small sip, tucks her wine cup into her sleeve, and glides out of the room with the kind of grace that says, I came prepared. I came with a contract. I came with 42 items and a perfectly timed backup wine plan. And you, half asleep, wonder if anyone's ever been more ready. The wedding fanfare fades by the next morning, replaced with soft sweeping sounds, clinking porcelain, and the occasional muffled yawn from a hungover uncle. You wake in the bride's new quarters, now noticeably lived in, silk robes draped over wooden racks, hairpins neatly aligned like soldiers on parade, and the faint scent of peony oil clinging to everything. But today's not about celebration. Today is about the fine print. You stretch, shuffle over to the window, and notice a cluster of elders murmuring in the main hall. They've unrolled something. Something long. Something filled with tightly packed characters. Oh yes, it's that part of the contract. The just-in-case clauses. Ancient Chinese prenups. You follow the murmurs and settle into a corner just in time to see the scroll being laid flat across a low table. Its edges curl slightly with age, but the ink is dark and purposeful. Somewhere near the bottom, beneath lists of obligations and rice allocations, is the section no one likes to talk about. What happens if this doesn't work out? Divorce in ancient China was rare, but not impossible. And the clever families? They planned for it. Mainstream historical fact. During the Tang dynasty, legal grounds for divorce were codified into what were known as the 7 outs, 7 acceptable reasons for a husband to divorce his wife. These included disobedience to in-laws, infertility, gossiping, theft, jealousy, and you guessed it, not producing male heirs. But even then, there were loopholes and protections, especially if the wife had nowhere else to go or if her dowry gave her leverage. So here it is. In elegant brushstrokes, the clawback clause. You lean in closer. Should the marriage dissolve under just cause, save for illness or parental disapproval, the dowry shall be returned in full, including jewelry, livestock, and any tools used exclusively by the bride. You blink. Tools. As in embroidery frames? Cooking knives? Possibly that parrot from earlier? You suppress a smile. It's oddly comforting that even in an era obsessed with cosmic harmony, they still knew relationships could go sideways. And they prepared for it with receipts. Historians still argue whether these return clauses were consistently honored, or if they were simply symbolic gestures, like promising to return a Tupperware you know you'll never see again. But the fact they exist at all? It's telling. The bride is sitting nearby, her expression unreadable. You get the sense she's already read the scroll, memorized the line breaks, probably made personal notes in a silk-covered journal. She looks calm, ready, not because she plans to leave but because she knows she could. There's power in that. One of the aunts pipes up. It says the gold bangles must be returned individually, not melted down. Another uncle chimes in, and the wedding teacups, no substitutions. You raise an eyebrow. This is meticulous. Apparently, someone once tried to return jade hairpins carved into cranes when the original ones were dragons. It nearly sparked a family feud. The scroll was updated shortly after. Quirky tidbit. In some rare contracts, the clawback clause was conditional upon the behavior of the groom. Yes, you heard that right. One surviving example from the Song dynasty specifies that if the husband is found to be a gambler, drunkard, or compulsively poetic, the wife may initiate divorce and reclaim not just her dowry but any household items purchased after the wedding. Imagine the drama of packing up the rice cooker and the bamboo wine rack while quoting Confucius with flair. As you follow along the scroll, the words flow into another section. No-cause divorces. Now this was rare and risky. If both families agreed, a couple could separate peacefully, but it often required returning gifts, dowry, and any honor that had been symbolically exchanged. In other words, you gave back the stuff and you apologized with an extra roast duck. Maybe two. You watch the elders wrap up their discussion, satisfied that the paperwork is thorough and fair. But just as you begin to drift into a stupor of legalese, a new scroll is brought in. It's not a marriage contract. It's a remarriage contract. Turns out this family has seen a thing or two. A cousin is marrying again. His second wife arriving in 2 weeks. And yes, she has her own dowry list. New terms. New clauses. Same meticulous system. You follow them to the back hall, where the bride's aunt sits recounting a story of a woman who, after being divorced for inappropriate laughter during ancestor offerings, used her dowry money to open a calligraphy shop. Within 3 years she remarried, this time to the village magistrate. Her new contract reportedly included a line that read, "Her smile shall not be censured unless during funeral rites." Iconic. You sip imaginary chrysanthemum tea and take it all in. These documents weren't just rules. They were shields. Maybe not unbreakable, but certainly better than nothing. A marriage could end, but a dowry, well managed, well documented, could protect the bride from disgrace and destitution. Fringe detail for you? In some provinces there were secret dowry ledgers, copies kept by the bride's natal family, sometimes written in code. detailing which items were sentimental heirlooms and must be reclaimed if the marriage soured. A jade hairpin marked with a plum blossom, for instance, might have 3 dots next to it in the ledger, meaning non-negotiable. Good luck trying to keep that in the divorce. The rest of the day settles into soft conversation and ceremonial leftovers. You hear someone humming as they polish a wedding goblet. Someone else is carefully repacking a set of scrolls, their fingers moving with reverence. The bride retires early. She passes by the scroll table one last time, fingers grazing the edge of the contract. Just lightly. She doesn't look down. Doesn't need to. She knows what's in there. And you? You're left with the strange, calming knowledge that even in a world of arranged matches, astrological rules and family politics, there was always a safety net of brushstrokes and silk-wrapped lists. A quiet understanding that love might falter, but the teacups? The teacups were going home with her. You awaken to a quieter household today. The wedding guests have returned to their corners of the empire, the firecrackers are silent, and even the ever-judging goose seems to be sleeping in. The bride, now officially a wife, walks slowly through the courtyard, a cup of morning tea cradled in her hands. The red decorations remain, but their vibrant cheer has dulled into soft rustle and memory. You stretch, following her footsteps, only to pause when you hear voices behind the family shrine. Curious, you tiptoe around and promptly freeze. There's a wedding, but this one is different. No groom, no blush-faced bride. Just a small group of family members dressed in mourning white, holding incense sticks and paper effigies. In the center of the ceremony is a wooden plaque with the name written on it, a name of someone no longer alive. Welcome to the hauntingly fascinating world of ghost marriages. Mainstream historical fact. In certain parts of ancient China, if an unmarried man died young, his family might arrange a posthumous marriage to prevent him from being lonely in the afterlife. These ghost marriages were conducted with nearly the same rituals as a living wedding, dowries included. Yes, even the dead got dowry lists. You watch in reverent silence as offerings are laid out. Fruit, incense, symbolic money folded from gold paper. And there, next to the spirit tablet, is a miniature lacquer box. Inside, tiny versions of dowry items. A silk robe barely bigger than your thumb. A silver comb no longer than a matchstick. Someone's carved a micro tea set. It's heartbreakingly meticulous, and yet somehow beautiful. The bride in this scenario is real and alive. Usually a woman from a poor family or a relative's daughter, she agrees or is persuaded to symbolically marry the deceased man. She may live with his family, care for his shrine, and receive a dowry in return. It's a complicated blend of grief, obligation, and cultural belief about harmony between the realms of the living and the dead. Historians still argue whether ghost marriages empowered the living bride or left her trapped in eternal widowhood. Some records show women were well treated and granted autonomy, others, less so. You step back slightly, giving the family space as they complete the rites. Paper servants are burned. A red thread is tied around the spirit plaque, then looped around the bride's wrist. A symbol of binding, of union, of duty that defies mortality. It's surreal, and yet oddly logical within its world. In a society so focused on ancestral honor and balance, why wouldn't they worry about an unmarried soul disrupting the spiritual ledger? Marriage was more than companionship. It was cosmic order. Quirky tidbit. Some ghost dowries included a rooster standing in for the groom. Yep, a literal chicken dressed in red silk, sometimes with a small paper hat. It would attend the wedding, standing in for the deceased husband. There's something deeply absurd and poetic about a bride bowing to a chicken with perfect posture. The family finishes the ritual. You hear the soft crunch of ashes as the paper offerings burn. The bride, her face calm, unties the red thread and places it inside the altar drawer. It's done. The deceased now has a companion in the afterlife. The living have fulfilled their duty, but your journey through ghost marriages isn't over just yet. You follow whispers to another village, smaller and dustier. This time it's a double ghost wedding. No living spouses involved. 2 spirit tablets. 2 empty sedan chairs. And yet the ceremony unfolds just as elaborately. Here the dowry list is purely symbolic: paper jewelry, silk clothing folded into intricate origami, even a pair of tiny handmade shoes. The idea is that these two deceased individuals, who may have never met in life, will now share eternity as a married couple. It's solemn, sure, but it's also strangely sweet and practical. Marrying two deceased individuals meant combining family lines, merging ancestral offerings, and strengthening alliances between clans. Even in death, relationships were strategic. You can't help but wonder what the ancestors think of all this. Somewhere beyond the veil, are they sipping ghost tea from ghost teacups, squabbling over phantom dumplings, trying to explain to the newest in-law how dowry number 37 was in the box, but got misplaced during the afterlife shipping process? Probably. You sit beneath a willow tree, letting the ceremony sounds fade. The bride from earlier returns, her veil tucked beneath one arm, her eyes tired but composed. She lights one final stick of incense and whispers something you can't hear. A blessing? A farewell? Maybe both. Fringe fact? In one recorded case, a ghost bride became so revered by her adopted family that they built a separate shrine just for her. Annual offerings were made in her name, and her dowry items, real, miniature, and burned, were commemorated in family records for generations. As the sun dips low and the sky takes on the dusky glow of lantern light orange, you find yourself back in the courtyard where the living bride sits, fidgeting with a tassel on her sleeve. She hasn't spoken since the ritual. Maybe she's thinking of her symbolic sister in marriage. Or maybe she's just tired of having phoenixes embroidered on everything. You sit beside her silently, watching red leaves fall. Not all marriages begin in joy. Not all dowries are unpacked. But all of them, each tea set, each veil, each clause, are bound by one human thread. The hope that someone somewhere will remember, even if that someone is long gone. You finally rest amid dusty archives and soft candlelight, where lost lovers and leftover lists sigh in silence. You're still here, drifting like a slow wisp of incense smoke curling between the rafters of a long-abandoned household shrine. Your feet scuff against the old wood of a sealed drawer as you walk through an echo. Quiet rooms that once heard laughter, arguments, and the rustling of contract scrolls being rolled and unrolled. Dust specks float lazily in shafts of golden morning light, each one like a drifting memory. Somewhere behind a wooden screen, a faded dowry list waits. Ink on silk. Fragile. Almost disintegrating. You're in the archives now. But not the kind where stern librarians hiss at you for sneezing. These are tucked away scroll rooms behind old temples and rural homes, family records boxed beside bundles of dried tea. The contracts you find here weren't just dry records. They were blueprints for family survival, status negotiations, and hopeful beginnings. Some even have smudges where nervous hands once held them, or signatures that curve wildly, betraying the hand of a shaky father reluctant to give his daughter away. You kneel beside one document. It's an unusually thick scroll, sealed with now faded vermilion. Inside, an enormous dowry list from a merchant family in late Qing dynasty. You read slowly. 12 bolts of silk, check. 5 ceramic urns, check. An actual goose, not metaphorical, just a goose, check. And then, oddly, one pocket-sized mirror, for warding off inauspicious glances. Cute. This is where stories settle, isn't it? In corners, in old drawers, in details like that mirror. Historians still argue whether these more superstitious entries were symbolic gestures, or if ancient brides genuinely kept ghost-banishing mirrors next to their hairpins. You smile a little. Seems like either way, somebody wanted a little extra luck with their marriage. Who wouldn't? But what's even more fascinating is how these old contracts have become ghost stories themselves. Many Chinese families, especially those from scholarly lineages, kept these documents for generations, proudly displaying them during festivals or quietly unfolding them during harder times, like talismans of stability. Sometimes, after centuries, when families split or moved or fell apart, the dowry list stayed behind, found later by some curious descendant or wayward historian. And that's when the whispering starts. There are stories, of course, there are always stories. One archivist in Hunan province swears the family dog wouldn't enter a room where a Song-era dowry contract was laid out. Another tale tells of a bride's ghost who corrected a historian's translation, allegedly by rearranging scrolls overnight in an otherwise locked library. Fringe stuff, sure. But after 9 sections of carefully catalogued pots and pillows, don't you secretly hope it's true? One of the more debated legends is the bride with no name contract. No date, No groom. Just a list of dowry items, signed only with a smudge where a name should be. Theories range from tragic ghost marriage to simple clerical error. Historians still argue whether it's evidence of a forgotten ritual, or someone just spilled their tea during registration. Either way, it's kept under glass now, in a quiet museum hall where even the floorboards seem too respectful to creak. As you rise, brushing phantom scroll dust from your sleeves, you realize something strange. After all this talk of bureaucracy and binding clauses, the emotional undercurrent is stronger than ever. These weren't just economic exchanges. They were, bizarrely, love letters in administrative disguise. A good dowry meant a future. It meant protection. It meant parents who hoped you'd be warm, clothed, and ideally, not stuck living next door. And the archives, with their yellowed edges and silk ties, have become something more than memory vaults. They are the final resting places of thousands of quiet hopes. You pass one last room before sleep comes. Inside, a low table with a carved lotus. Atop it, a bundle of contracts, and next to them, a folded piece of modern notebook paper. You lean in. It's a note from a great-granddaughter, written in pen, awkward Chinese characters, slightly slanted. She thanks her ancestor for the silk dowry that gave their family the first shop, the first house, the first chance. That shop's a cafe now. They sell bubble tea and run a history blog. She signs the note with a tiny heart. And you exhale. The lanterns dim. The scrolls grow heavier in their sleep. Somewhere, maybe, a bride from the Tang dynasty turns once in her paper tomb satisfied. The ink hasn't faded yet. Her list, her mirror, her legacy, they all survived. Somehow. And you, sleepy traveler, have reached the end of your path.